On a frosty morning with a little February sun, Clifford and Connie went for a walk across the park to the wood. That is, Clifford chuffed in his motor chair and Connie walked beside him. The hard air was still sulphurous, but they were both used to it. Round the near horizon went the haze, opalescent with frost and smoke, and on the top lay the small blue sky, so that it was like being inside an enclosure, always inside. Life, always a dream or a frenzy, inside an enclosure. The sheep coughed in the rough, sere grass of the park, where frost lay bluish in the sockets of the tufts. Across the park ran a path to the wood gate, a fine ribbon of pink. Clifford had had it newly gravelled with sifted gravel from the pit bank. When the rock and refuse of the underworld had burned and given off its sulphur, it turned bright pink, shrimp-coloured on dry days, darker, crab-coloured on wet. Now it was pale shrimp colour, with a bluish-white hoar of frost. It always pleased Connie, this underfoot of sifted bright pink. It's an ill wind that brings nobody good. Clifford steered cautiously down the slope of the knoll from the hall, and Connie kept her hand on the chair. In front lay the wood, the hazel thicket nearest, the purplish density of oaks beyond. From the wood's edge, rabbits bobbed and nibbled. Rooks suddenly rose in a black train and went trailing off over the little sky. Connie opened the wood gate, and Clifford puffed slowly through into the broad riding that ran up an incline between the clean-whipped thickets of the hazel. The wood was a remnant of the great forest where Robin Hood hunted, and this riding was an old thoroughfare coming across country. But now, of course, it was only a riding through the private wood. The road from Mansfield swerved round to the north. In the wood everything was motionless, the old leaves on the ground keeping the frost on their underside. A jay called harshly, many little birds fluttered, but there was no game, no pheasants. They had been killed off during the war, and the wood had been left unprotected, till now Clifford had got his gamekeeper again. Clifford loved the wood. He loved the old oak trees. He felt they were his own through generations. He wanted to protect them. He wanted this place inviolate, shut off from the world. The chair chuffed slowly up the incline, rocking and jolting on the frozen clods. And suddenly, on the left, came a clearing where there was nothing but a ravel of dead bracken, a thin and spindly sapling leaning here and there, big sawn stumps showing their tops and their grasping roots, lifeless, and patches of blackness where the woodmen had burned the brushwood and rubbish. This was one of the places that Sir Geoffrey had cut during the war for trench timber. The whole knoll, which rose softly on the right of the riding, was denuded and strangely forlorn. On the crown of the knoll, where the oaks had stood, now was bareness, and from there you could look out over the trees to the colliery railway and the new works at Stack's Gate. Connie had stood and looked. It was a breach in the pure seclusion of the wood. It let in the world, but she didn't tell Clifford. This denuded place always made Clifford curiously angry. He had been through the war, had seen what it meant. But he didn't get really angry till he saw this bare hill. He was having it replanted, but it made him hate Sir Geoffrey. Clifford sat with a fixed face as the chair slowly mounted. When they came to the top of the rise, he stopped. He would not risk the long and very jolty downslope. He sat looking at the greenish sweep of the riding downwards, a clear way through the bracken and oaks. It swerved at the bottom of the hill and disappeared, but it had such a lovely easy curve of knights riding and ladies on palfreys. "I consider this is really the heart of England," said Clifford to Connie, as he sat there in the dim February sunshine. "Do you?" she said, seating herself in her blue knitted dress on a stump by the path. "I do. This is the old England, the heart of it, and I intend to keep it intact." "Oh yes," said Connie. But as she said it, she heard the 11 o'clock hooters at Stacksgate Colliery. Clifford was too used to the sound to notice. "I want this wood perfect, untouched. I want nobody to trespass in it," said Clifford. There was a certain pathos. The wood still had some of the mystery of wild old England, but Sir Geoffrey's cuttings during the war had given it a blow. How still the trees were with their crinkly innumerable twigs against the sky, and their grey obstinate trunks rising from the brown bracken. How safely the birds flitted among them, and once there had been deer and archers, and monks padding along on asses. The place remembered, still remembered. Clifford sat in the pale sun with the light on his smooth, rather blonde hair, his reddish, full face inscrutable. "I mind more, not having a son when I come here than any other time," he said. "But the wood is older than your family," said Connie gently. "Quite," said Clifford, "but we've preserved it. Except for us it would be gone already, like the rest of the forest. One must preserve some of the old England." "Must one?" said Connie. "If it has to be preserved, and preserved against the New England, it's sad, I know." "If some of the old England isn't preserved, there'll be no England at all," said Clifford, "and we who have this kind of property and the feeling for it must preserve it." There was a sad pause. "Yes, for a little while," said Connie. "For a little while. It's all we can do. We can only do our bit. I feel every man of my family has done his bit here, since we've had the place. One may go against convention, but one must keep up tradition." Again there was a pause. "What tradition?" asked Connie. "The tradition of England, of this." "Yes," she said slowly. "That's why having a son helps. One is only a link in a chain," he said. Connie was not keen on chains, but she said nothing. She was thinking of the curious impersonality of his desire for a son. "I'm sorry we can't have a son," she said. He looked at her steadily, with his full, pale blue eyes. "It would almost be a good thing if you had a child by another man," he said. "If we brought it up at Rugby, it would belong to us and to the place. I don't believe very intensely in fatherhood. If we had the child to rear, it would be our own, and it would carry on. Don't you think it's worth considering?" Connie looked up at him at last. The child, her child, was just an it to him. It. "But what about the other man?" she asked. "Does it matter very much? Do these things really affect us very deeply? You had that lover in Germany. What is it now? Nothing, almost. It seems to me that it isn't these little acts and little connections we make in our lives that matter so very much. They pass away, and where are they? Where Where are the snows of yesteryear? It's what endures through one's life that matters. My own life matters to me, in its long continuance and development. But what do the occasional connections matter? And the occasional sexual connections especially. If people don't exaggerate them ridiculously, they pass like the mating of birds, and so they should. What does it matter? It's the lifelong companionship that matters. It's the living together from day to day, not the sleeping together once or twice. You and I are married no matter what happens to us. We have the habit of each other. And habit, to my thinking, is more vital than any occasional excitement. The long, slow, enduring thing, that's what we live by, not the occasional spasm of any sort. Little by little, living together, two people fall into a sort of unison. They vibrate so intricately to one another. That's the real secret of marriage, not sex, at least not the simple function of sex. You and I are interwoven in a marriage. If we stick to that, we ought to be able to arrange this sex thing, as we arrange going to the dentist. Since fate has given us a checkmate, physically there.
Wait a minute.